Hello there. Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, the Trump-Harris presidential debate. We'll look at the highlights and get reaction from both Democrats and Republicans.
It was a pretty feisty affair. Harris said that world leaders think Trump is a disgrace. Trump said that she's a Marxist and illegal immigrants are eating people's pet dogs.
There was a lot of anticipation leading up to this debate, particularly after Joe Biden's rather spectacular flame-out in the first debate back in June. This was Trump's 7th presidential debate, more than anybody else in American history. It was Kamala Harris's first. Unlike in past years, this presidential debate is owned by an American TV network, and so we're legally not allowed to show you very much of the more than 90-minute debate. So as a result, we'll be playing a few heavily edited clips, which we've chosen because they illustrate some key points we want to make. So overall, how did Trump and Harris do? Well, according to a snap poll from CNN, Harris won by an almost 2-to-1 margin. Is it a fair reflection, do you think, Chaz, at this stage?
Look, I never like talking about winning debates because it really depends what they're trying to do. But I think that Harris would be happier, with this debate than Trump would, because this debate, in my view, was entirely about defining Kamala Harris. At this point in time, according to the New York Times, Siena, a third of Americans still want to know more about Kamala Harris. She hasn't done many interviews. She was a sitting duck to be defined by a certain number of people during this debate. And I think she'll be happy with how she was defined than Trump would be. Trump was trying to define her in a negative way. She was trying to show the commander-in-chief mettle. I think she came off very reasonably. She didn't come off like a nutter. She didn't come off like she was out of her depth. She didn't come off like she was struggling. She was in control, and I think she'd be happy with that.
Yeah, and Trump dusted off the same playbook he used to great success against Joe Biden, saying this person's stupid, they're shot, they can't talk off a teleprompter, they're going to be terrible. Kamala Harris was certainly not terrible. In fact, there were times when it clearly showed that she was on top of Donald Trump, controlling him to the extent that she was repeatedly sort of taunting him and baiting him in a way that you sort of think, they've done the same sort of psychological profiles that Putin and others have done. They know how to get under this guy's skin, to kneel him a bit.
Yeah, we did flag this going into the debate, that Kamala Harris would be trying to provoke him, to trying to get him to melt down, and Trump would be trying to push her off balance because he thinks that she's chained to the auto cue and to pre-memorised answers. And I think you'd have to say that she did a better job of that than Trump did. There's
a clip I want to play for you because it started off clearly with a jibe at Trump, which others have tried in the past. Think back to Marco Rubio in 2015 talking about Trump having small hands. We all know what that means. That was an attempt of doing that, but Harris was a bit more successful. She went for the size of his rallies instead, and Trump ended up talking about, well, people eating dogs. Take a look.
You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You talk about extreme.
Now, I think there was an effective moment for Harris because Trump did go right off the rails with an unfounded story. It's been debunked, even though J.D. Vance and others are tweeting about illegal immigrants eating dogs and cats. But her coming in with talk about extreme, that was clearly one of those clear words that they had been trying to put out there to just plant in the minds of viewers. He's extreme. He's extreme. There are a few of them throughout this that I think showed her level of discipline and preparation.
I think also it's a shame we couldn't play the entire clip because what you would see with that is how effectively Harris used the split screen and Trump did not. Yeah. He looked very put off when she was having to go at him, and when he was having to go at her talking about dogs and cats, she was just laughing.
Yeah.
She really used the split screen well. I think that makes a big difference.
Given that Trump is one of the masters of the televisual medium, he knows when the camera is on him. He was very good at mugging, pulling faces in previous debates, knowing when he was in shot behind Hillary Clinton, dominating her in those visuals. I was surprised at how sour and surly, just sort of looking down and in front of himself, while Harris was trying to make eye contact with him and basically, without saying it in as many words, mocking him with her quite an array of facial expressions that said, this guy's crazy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure she'd be able to keep it up for 90 minutes.
She did.
Because it was clearly a plan, and she did. She absolutely did. But on the other side, when we're talking about, I mean, that was she definitely got under his skin a couple of times. That was one example. There were probably two other examples when I thought, yeah, she got him here. But he didn't melt down, and that's the important thing. She wanted him to melt down. He did not melt down. That wasn't a great answer he gave there. There was another time he didn't give a great answer, but what she wanted was a debate-ending moment from her provoking him, and she didn't get that. So let's be clear about that. It's
Cats and Dogs was pretty weird. It's going to look, and as a soundbite, it's going to look like Crazy Town, even if you sort of saw how he built up and into it.
She wanted a Trump first debate 2020 kind of moment when Joe Biden was like, oh my God, what's this guy doing? She wanted one of those moments, and she didn't get it. Right? And he was restrained enough to not give that to her. On the other side, I saw him only push her off balance once, which was when he basically accused her of being the cause of the Ukraine war. She clearly wasn't prepared for that one. That was a weird accusation, which is what I thought he might try a few of. And she had no prepared answer, obviously, because she just moved into a 2-minute word salad that was all over the place. Yep. But having said that, I don't think it matters. It was just one answer.
Trump accused her of meeting with both Zelensky and Putin, and then 3 days later the war starts, so therefore her efforts at diplomacy failed. She did meet with Zelensky when it was clear an invasion was about to happen. She did not meet with Putin. That was false, but for whatever reason, Harris didn't want to say, well, I didn't meet with Putin, because he would have probably come back and said, well, you should have, shouldn't you?
Yeah, I just think she never prepared an answer. But the fact is, she was prepared for everything else. And this was, I think, one of the features of this debate, that we heard so much going into this debate about rehearsal, about how much rehearsal Kamala Harris had done.
Vice President Kamala Harris hunkers down.
Kamala Harris hunkers down.
Hunkering down.
Hunkering down.
Hunkering down.
Harris hunkers down in Pennsylvania.
Which sounds great until he realised that was what Joe Biden had done beforehand.
As Biden is hunkering down.
President Biden is hunkering down.
President Biden is hunkering down.
So maybe that wasn't auspicious, but she went to extreme lengths, even getting the person that she was prepping against as Donald Trump to be the same height as Donald Trump.
Harris has done at least 2 mock debates.
With an advisor, Philippe Reynes, standing in for Trump. He reportedly wears an oversized suit and shoes with a 3-inch lift to get into character.
And we saw the results of this. She was clearly very programmed. She was using whole slabs from her convention speech, like the guardrails bit about Trump with no guardrails. But then when topics came up like, say, race, she was so ready. She has had a completely prepared speech, which was it was a killer. It worked really well. Like, she was ready for pretty much anything. And to contrast with Trump, who just throws stuff everywhere, using references shorthand references that people wouldn't necessarily understand. This was an example of when she was ready, and she used the quick references like Trump does, but explained every one of them.
Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the former president said, stand back and stand by. So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say we don't have to go back.
So she had her litany of charges ready, explained effectively, quickly, moving directly into her tagline.
Yes.
That's the impact of preparation. Whereas by contrast, and we talked about her body preparation as well was very good. By contrast, Trump, not so well prepared. He had these 2-minute blocks to fill, and he kept on being able to answer the question in 30 seconds and then just woofing around for the next minute 30 on whatever topic.
Repeatedly pivoting to talk about immigration.
Yeah.
And then he still had time to then answer a drive-by slap at him about him being weak or some other triggering word that Harris had prepared to kind of niggle him, get under his skin.
Absolutely, but it just wasn't as tight as Harris was because he wasn't prepared. And the perfect example of this for me was when I thought Harris gave him the biggest own goal ever, which was when they were talking about abortion, and she had a pretty good period during the abortion section. Yeah. And just out of nowhere, she said, and people don't even have, people under the Trump abortion bans can't even get IVF. And I thought, that is a mistake, because one of his policies that he announced 2 weeks ago was free IVF for anyone. She was teeing him up for his key policy to undermine her. I thought, what a terrible mistake she made then. He didn't even mention it. Because I think he forgot that was his policy. He wasn't prepared.
She was definitely prepared. In that preparation, though, certainly in the first 10 minutes of the debate, she was nervous. She was a bit dry-mouthed. She was gulping a bit. As you would be, I'm sure, at first-time presidential debate. But, of course, that means if you're trying to remember your answers rather than being in the moment, you run the risk of flubbing your answers. And we saw that with Joe Biden to disastrous effect, whereas Trump is always in the moment. He doesn't prepare full answers. It is about just his go-to phrases, his attacks and everything else. So he's a much more nimble debater. And certainly if they debate again, you can imagine that Trump is going to be trying to do more to knock Harris off her talking points. But ironically, Trump's strongest moment, where he really did lack message discipline, he was constantly sort of falling for traps that have been laid for him about the 2020 election or the Russiagate scandal or his criminal indictments or whatever. When he finally got to nail the message, the one thing that he clearly had rehearsed and remembered, it came in the final 2 minutes of the debate.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
That was a great attack.
Sure.
And he followed it immediately with a completely different thing.
Yeah. It is a core argument. It's a core argument in some of their ads. It's something he often says in his rallies. It's, if they have the answers, why hasn't she done it? Now, of course, the answer to that is because I've been vice president, not president. Let me be president and I'll do the things I'm telling you I will do. And she did have a better kind of a shopping list of things that were on her wish list, the programs she would like to have, the policies she would like to have. Trump didn't really talk too much about the future and was denying the fact that he had specific plans on things like abolishing the Affordable Care Act, for example.
Well, I think that was more important for her, to be honest. If we're talking about their aims or what they were aiming for and were they successful, I mean, the knock on her, on Kamala Harris, is that she hasn't released much policy until now. She only put an issues page on her website yesterday. She hasn't been doing many interviews. So Trump's been trying to hit her as vacant, as an empty suit, and she needed to combat that. And so it was really important for her to come out and talk about policy. And whether she talked a bit about policy, about her future plans. She certainly used the phrase, I have a plan, enough times. But I think that was very intentional, trying to just get in people's thoughts. Yeah, she does have plans. She does have policies. And so I thought it was important for her to combat that, and I thought she did.
The thing that Trump, according to a number of reports, discussions with Trump campaign staff, all suggested that Trump, his main objective was to say this ill-defined figure that is Kamala Harris is a flip-flopper. She can't be trusted. She used to be against fracking in Pennsylvania. She wanted to ban it. Now she says she's not going to ban it. The Green New Deal, she was all for that in 2019. She now says that's not necessary. A bunch of things where she's changed her position. They want to say, well, you don't know what she stands for, and she is too liberal. She's dangerously progressive. She's a left-winger. She's Bernie Sanders' love child. He didn't really prosecute that. He called her a Marxist and said her father was a Marxist economist and she's a Marxist too. But he didn't, I don't think, achieve that kind of demonising her as a San Francisco liberal, which I think a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives, when we're talking about the undecided moderate Republicans who are not sure they want to vote for Trump, they need to be told that Harris is a risk, that she's going to be too left-wing, and I don't think he achieved that.
I think he tried to achieve it. Like, he mentioned fracking, her secretly being against fracking about 4 times. He mentioned her trying to take your guns away a few times. He tried. I just don't think she came off as seeming very extreme.
No.
The other thing he tried to do is to, I think one of his aims is to tie her to Biden, who's obviously an anchor on her. And at one point in time, he explicitly said, she is President Biden.
Yeah.
But I think he kind of overreached a little bit in that regard. And she got, I thought, a good moment off in response to say, clearly, I'm not President Biden.
Right.
And that tied into her basically insinuating he's a bit old and confused, which she did a couple of times. She said, just to clarify, you're not running against President Biden. She said in a slightly patronising way, which was insinuating you've lost it, mate.
Yeah.
So I don't think that worked for him, to be honest, even though he tried.
Yeah. And there was a certain amount of relitigating the past, not just Harris being asked to defend Biden's economy, Biden's immigration, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but there was also, the moderators gave Harris quite a few, I guess, helpful setups by pressing Trump, particularly on the 2020 election, and making him clarify, defend, and basically say that the people who attacked the Capitol building are great people.
Yeah, I think if we're being fair here, we have to say the moderators did have an impact on this debate, and it was not to Trump's advantage. I think the fact that they spent 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes, I checked on this, talking about January 6th and the 2020 election, you don't want to be litigating 4 years ago, especially on defence. And that's what he had to do. He had to defend for 10 minutes on this ancient stuff, to the point where he did something I've never seen Trump do before, ever, which is in the middle of talking about 2020, said, let's stop talking about this. Let's talk about the future. The nation's in decline. Like, he was the one who tried to cut off the discussion.
He was trying to discipline himself to not get bogged down on this.
But that was the moderators who were doing that.
Right. And there's a clip we want to play for you now, which begins with Trump talking about 2020, because he has in recent weeks suggested that, maybe he lost it by a smidge rather than denying that he lost it at all. Then it was an opening for Harris to go on the attack and to try and once again niggle Trump by saying essentially all the other kids in the school ground don't like you. Have a look.
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
That.
You know that. It was said, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace.
Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart, Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago, it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president.
And so that all came off the moderators pushing these topics, right? And it's not just that. The fact-checking. They only fact-check Trump. And look, let's be clear. The fact-checks were all accurate. They're all there.
Yep.
He was saying mistruths, right? And they were pulling him up on it. But they tended to pull him up at moments when he had momentum. They were literally impacting the momentum of the debate with their fact checks.
And they weren't giving him an opportunity to respond to the fact check. They would simply say, well, of course, that's not true. It's not legal to kill babies in any states. And now into the next question, leaving him muted. So he was kind of left in a slightly impotent position.
Absolutely. And every single time that would have made him look quite bad. And it happened 6 or 7 times. So, and worst of all, probably there weren't many viral moments from this debate, but probably the closest we got to a viral moment was when they were talking about healthcare plans. And of course, Trump had nothing to say about that. He was bluffing it, as he usually does. And then the moderator came out of nowhere with this.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
Now, that's not a moderatorish kind of thing to say. Like, that was intervening in debate, and it set Trump up to embarrass himself with a viral moment. We're probably going to see many times from here on in. That was entirely the intervention of the moderator. So I reckon he has a legitimate complaint.
Well, maybe. He didn't have a good answer. And at the end of the day, these aren't moderators, these are journalists. This is not a debate. It's a freewheeling discussion about any number of policy things. But yeah, I think that is going straight to an attack ad. For more analysis, we're joined by Republican political strategist Brett Doster, who worked on both Jeb Bush's and Mitt Romney's presidential campaigns. And Brett joins us from the state of Florida. Brett, welcome to Planet America.
John, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
It's a great pleasure. Overall, what were your impressions of the two candidates today?
Well, I tell you what, I'm not sure that there was a whole lot of new lines of attack that were revealed here. I'm not sure that there was a whole lot that we learned according to style. I think we were all expecting maybe a little different tone coming from Trump, maybe a little different tone coming from Harris. And I think they stuck with their tried and true tactics. And if you were an undecided voter watching this debate, I'm not quite sure that your mind has been changed yet.
Brett, so often with these debates, people don't watch the whole debate. Some people watch some watch other bits. But it's the moments that have a life of their own that people remember from the debates in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. Did you see any particular moments that you thought, this is a potential moment that could be used in an advertising campaign or a viral video somewhere down the track? I know, for instance, I've seen Democrats online already trying to hype up the fact that Trump didn't rule out the idea of a national abortion ban. He just said it's not going to happen. He didn't say he'd veto it. So, was that a moment, or were there other moments that you saw that you thought might have a life of their own?
Well, that's what I kind of meant by the fact that there weren't really major points scored here on either side. I did think that Kamala Harris did a good job of pointing out what she would believe to be the problems with Trump on the abortion issue. But I thought Trump, frankly, did a good job of directly asking her, or asking the commentators to ask her, if she would support an abortion at 7 months, at 8 months, at 9 months. And that definitely put her back on the defensive, as she was not prepared to answer that question. Now, there were some other moments. I thought that Trump overall did a good job of reinserting the border issue over and over and over again, which he was supposed to do tonight, to remind everyone. I think that Harris did a good job of introducing basically her new campaign ad tonight, which was to remind everyone of all the former staffers that worked for Trump that now are supporting her, which I thought was a good moment for her in the debate.
But in terms of those other sort of strategies that became quite clear, it seemed that Kamala Harris repeatedly she was talking policy, then she'd have this kind of drive-by attack on Trump to goad him into something he's sensitive about. Oh, you're weak, or your rallies are boring and everybody leaves. Yeah. So that when it was his turn for a rebuttal, he was drawn into talking about rally sizes, not about the policy things. Was that a good call, just goading Trump in that way?
No, 100%. I thought that Harris did get him sidetracked a few times tonight. There's no doubt about that. I thought the rally size and whether people were staying at his rallies or leaving in particular was one that got him distracted. Trump is wont to chase the shiny object in these debates, right? And so she laid a few of those tidbits out there for him, and he pursued that. And it caused him, I think, to miss a few opportunities that he could have taken to be a bit stronger with her.
One of the other things that was happening repeatedly was Trump being drawn back into discussions about past controversies, whether it was Charlottesville, January 6th, his denial of the 2020 election result. Harris then seemed to have a deliberate pivot to say, but I want to talk about the future. Is that the kind of contrast that is playing to a particular demographic? It seemed that there was a point to what she was doing there.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, look, she had one point in the debate where she said, I want to remind you, I'm not Joe Biden. You're running against me, right? She's trying to divorce herself from this current administration and talk about the future now. And, I do think that Trump probably spent too much time talking about the past. I think, frankly, Trump didn't do a good enough job talking about what he's going to do in his 4 years of his next administration. That would be different from what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been doing for the last 3.5 years.
So, Brett, at the end of the day, back in late June, we saw probably the most consequential presidential debate in history. It led to a sitting president ending his re-election bid. What impact, if any, do you expect this debate will have on the rest of this election campaign?
Interesting you should say that. I think that, again, this is what I predicted when I was speaking with a few people last week. I said if either side has a dominant performance, okay, in this first debate, they will say that there's no need for any further debates. I don't think we had that kind of debate. I think both sides will be coming back to each other and saying, okay, we need to have another debate. I could be wrong about that, but my prediction is that the American public's not going to let them off the hook. And it was not good enough by either side to say this is definitive for this campaign. You also have to remember, guys, you have to remember that we're talking literally about 500,000 to 750,000 undecided voters, okay, in 6 states who are really impacted by this debate. The other, 42 states in the country, 43 states in the country really don't matter at this point.
Do you think, Brett, that one nominee needs to come out of the debates stronger than the other one, or do you think it doesn't really matter?
Look, I think, in my humble opinion, and I'm an ads maker, I do a lot of direct mail, a lot of advertising. I will tell you this right now. I think most of your undecided voters out there represent a tiny fraction of the electorate. If you're looking at public polls right now, less than 6% in all the swing states are truly undecided. Another direct mail piece, another TV ad, another radio ad is not going to change their mind. They need to see these two candidates in action, in person, in these debates, jousting with one another before they'll finally make up their mind. So I think, frankly, that the debates really are important and will be critical in the upcoming weeks.
Brett Doster, so great to get your insights. Thanks for taking the time for us.
Hey, gentlemen, thanks for having me on.
So fair to say there that Brett's not exactly spiking the football on behalf of Republicans, not less triumphant than they were back in June from Trump's performance. As for Democrats, on social media, the early reaction, very positive, spreading around a lot of clips of Kamala Harris's better moments and Trump's worst moments, sharing those poll results that show overwhelmingly that Harris was the winner of this debate, which probably comes at a good time for her because the momentum that came from that wave of relief after Biden dropped out and then the Democratic convention, it just seems to have, I don't know, the wind was out of their sails for the last few days.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think this is like a mini version of that wave of relief they had after Biden stood down. In that, the polls were starting to. I mean, Harris was still 50-50 on the polls, but it was starting to move against her. Every day the swing state polls were moving against her. It looked like Trump was about to take the lead again. And there was just this creeping sensation, I feel, from Democrats that they were getting a little bit worried about the fact that maybe she can't do interviews. Maybe maybe we've got ourselves an empty suit here, like Trump keeps on saying.
What if we put in another dud debate?
Yeah, and I think they were getting nervous. And I think the fact that she did everything she needed to do during this debate, I think they would feel very relieved about.
Well, let's find out to get that Democratic perspective. We're joined from California by political consultant Steve Maviglio. He's worked on a whole bunch of Democratic presidential campaigns, including Mike Dukakis in 1988, Bill Clinton's White House run in 1992 as well. Steve, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you.
This was certainly a better debate from a Democrat's point of view. Kamala Harris, though, she seemed a little nervous to me at the start of this debate, a bit dry-mouthed. Were you getting a bit nervous, seeing her a bit nervous?
Well, yes. I was very nervous going into this because most Americans have no idea who she was, so she had a lot to accomplish tonight. The bar was set really high for her because she is an attorney, and we know how Trump performs, but we didn't know how she was going to perform, so I think she exceeded expectations.
Right at the beginning there, when asked about whether people were better off over the last 4 years or not, she elected to not really defend the administration for the last 4 years. She started talking about all the things she needed to fix. Do you think that's the right tactic, to not try to defend the administration economically and just focus entirely on turning the page, or do you think she should defend the administration more?
Well, I think she mentioned some of the accomplishments of the administration on health care, on creating jobs, on clean energy, and I think that's the way to pivot away from that question and to talk about the future. I mean, the overall sense she was trying to say is we're not going back to what he brought us. We need to move forward, and I think she did that very successfully on almost every answer.
Steve, it's one thing to establish who is this person, Kamala Harris, her talking about her middle-class upbringing and how she supports small business as a result of growing up in a single-parent household and so on. Biography is important, but there's also that threshold question of commander-in-chief. That's the first time we've seen a woman of colour try and pass that test, cross that threshold. Do you think she achieved that?
Yeah, I think she was very poised throughout. I think she was very presidential. She looked powerful at times when defending and the administration on some affairs and talking forcefully about a woman's right to choose. I think that was her best answer of the night. So I think she came across the way most people expect the president to look tonight, and I thought she did very well.
Harris was trying to provoke Trump at times. There was one answer to the question, I think, about Trump prosecuting his opponents, where she said he didn't have the temperament or the ability to not be confused, kind of edging towards calling him too old. And Trump seemed to lose it a little bit in his answer. He was rambling about Orban and Nord Stream pipeline and all kinds of stuff like that. Do you think, though, overall, Trump held it together enough when being provoked?
No, I think she clearly got under his skin so many times, and she baited him, and he took the bait. You know, there's a lesson in politics: when you're losing, stop digging. But he kept digging and digging, digging. Whether it was talking about, I think in one sentence he talked about transgender, illegal aliens, and something else, all crazy things, all in one breath. So you could tell when she talked about his crowd size, that's what really got him going, and it was all downhill from there.
Steve, on many occasions you have been the voice in the ear of the candidate on that stage. No doubt when you're hearing the words come out of candidates' mouths, you get a sense of what have been the messages drilled into them, what have they been told at debate camp or in those policy sessions that Trump prefers. What do you think their key objectives were and their key messages were from the way they were pivoting, trying to get to certain safe spots or key messages?
Well, you know, she did very well in making this a referendum on him instead of him making this referendum on her. And she did that successfully by actually talking about voters, and he was talking about her and talking about Biden. And several times she looked straight at the camera and said, hey, here's what I'm going to do for you, middle-class voter. I think she hit it when she talked about Latino voters, black voters, Polish Americans in Pennsylvania, young people, about climate. She talked to those voters they need to win, and he never did that.
The narrative used to attack Kamala Harris over the last few weeks has been she's got no plan, she doesn't do interviews, she's hiding, all this kind of stuff. It felt like she was trying to combat that by using the phrase, I have a plan, as many times as she possibly could. Do you think that she successfully pulled that off and might have changed the narrative on her during this debate?
Yeah, I mean, she had talking points about some things she wanted to do. And I think one of the better questions was on Trump's healthcare plan, which after 9 years, nobody's seen yet. And so I think that negated her lack of specificity and a lot of policy details when he didn't have many himself.
Yeah, there are times, Steve, where that seemed a little contradictory. Kamala Harris saying, I've got a plan, he hasn't got a plan. Oh, except he does have a plan and it's called Project 2025. There's a bit of a disconnect there. Does that sort of logical leap matter to viewers, do you think?
No, you know, everybody thinks they are going to vote on somebody's policy proposal, because let's face it, that's not what people vote on. I mean, a lot of this tonight was about personality. A lot of it was about the way they looked. The split screen, for example, I thought really helped Kamala Harris. She looked poised and was giving him the, what are you talking about, look, a lot. And he just was shaking his head, looking down. I don't think he even looked at her once, except for once or twice during the entire debate. And she was staring at him most of the time.
Do you think, as a bit of a debate expert, that the body language is critical in these debates, or does it get overplayed sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. You're going to hear about Trump's sweaty lip, I think, way too much tomorrow, our time.
Steve, ultimately, is this debate going to alter the trajectory of the race? Is it going to give Harris the kind of reinvigoration that seems to have been lost in the last week? The polls have plateaued somewhat. Does this give her a springboard now, or was it not as definitive enough a performance to really add to any momentum?
Well, I mean, I think any person could see that she won this debate handily, so that's only going to help. I mean, we're talking about a handful of voters in a handful of states, and anybody who is just checking in for the first time, and there are, believe it or not, voters out there like that, could see tonight a very stark difference.
Steve Maviglio, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Presidential debates have become a familiar feature in American politics, offering the candidates a primetime TV audience in the tens of millions and the chance to go toe-to-toe with their rival. Despite the hype, though, some are soon forgotten. Sometimes, of course, they can also change an election and indeed the course of American history.
We're live from Georgia.
We saw in late June just how high the stakes can be.
Now, please welcome the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Folks, how are you?
President Biden's faltering, feeble display increased voter concerns about his age.
Dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Within weeks, that flub had forced Biden from the campaign. The impact of a bad debate is usually not as swift or dramatic, but can still be profound. In 1976, President Gerald Ford said something odd at a time when the Soviet Union's influence in Eastern Europe extended as far as Berlin.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
That fed into a narrative of gaffes and missteps that saw Ford stumble to defeat. 12 years later, Democrat Mike Dukakis was asked what some felt was an inappropriate question about his wife.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime.
To some debate watchers, Dukakis' response was calm. To more, it seemed heartless, like he didn't care if his wife was killed. In 1992, after a dozen years of Republicans in the White House, it felt to many like George Bush's time was nearly up, and Bush gave the media the perfect image when he repeatedly checked his watch, like he had some place he'd rather be.
How has the national debt personally affected each of your lives?
In 2000, Al Gore could hardly disguise his contempt and frustration with George W. Bush. And in their third debate, Gore seemed to be invading Bush's personal space. Bush didn't miss a beat.
But can you get things done? And I believe I can.
In 2012, after 4 years in office, President Barack Obama seemed annoyed to be wasting his time debating Mitt Romney instead of celebrating his wedding anniversary.
I just want to wish, sweetie, you happy anniversary and let you know that a year from now we will not be celebrating it in front of 40 million people.
I'm sure this was the most romantic place you could imagine, here with me.
That was about it. For laughs, Obama put in a surly, peevish performance.
Is the reason that Governor Romney is keeping all these plans to replace secret because they're too good?
Obama's grouchy mood saw Romney jump ahead in the polls, but only briefly. Presidential debates may seem to be about policy differences, but they are really a performance. And often voters judge the candidates on the small moments they haven't rehearsed or cannot hide. A single word or phrase, a gesture, a look. And on such small things, history can turn. So we're just about out of time, Chaz, but I guess the question now is where to for the rest of this campaign? We're into the final 2-month stretch to November 5. The Harris campaign has already thrown down the gauntlet, said we'd like another one of those debates, thanks very much. We've also had Taylor Swift announcing right off the back of the debate that she's endorsing Kamala Harris as well. No great surprise there, but it might be a way for the Harris campaign to regain the initiative.
I just don't think there was enough there to change the actual trajectory of this race. I know the ground under Kamala Harris's feet's probably a little bit firmer than it was before, but essentially, I think we are back in trench warfare. Where we've been for the last 10 years, it's just going to be 50,000 votes here, 20,000 votes there, and we're not going to know what's going to happen till about 2 weeks after the election.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ultimately, though, Kamala Harris had more to lose and to gain from today. She stood there, if not exactly toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. She stood her ground on that stage. She acquitted herself well. She also successfully, I think, recast this as a choice not between her and Trump, but the past and the future. And she also had a lot of policies that were specifically targeted at the 50 or 100,000 moderate to conservative women who are not fans of Donald Trump, but are worried about her being seen as too extreme. she's got this fairly moderate image going at the moment that Trump has not really successfully done much to counter, at least not yet. But that is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you next Wednesday night from 9 p.m. on ABC iView and 9:30 on ABC TV.
And we're going to have a fireside chat on ABC News this Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. See you then.
Bye-bye.